So I'm going back through the archives today, and here's what I mean by that. The Gametime Guru podcast has opened up so many opportunities for me, not just in the ways that you think. See, I'm going to explain briefly the evolution of my media journey. So when I started the Gametime Guru, I also, about a year, 2 years after starting the Gametime Guru, I was hosting a podcast for the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. And so that was one that I did. It was a college football podcast on a weekly basis. I also hosted 2 different shows for Nations Best Football. This is on top of doing my Gametime Guru podcast. From that time, I also had started Scarlet and Great, which was a podcast for Ohio State football that we did for 3 years. And all the while still running the Gametime Guru podcast for the last 8.5 years. But those were some of the media journeys that I was on, and they didn't always intertwine, right? Not every one of them, intertwined with the others. I didn't always cross promote them or anything of that nature, but those were some of the media ventures that I was on. But this interview with Leigh Steinberg was for the Nations Best Brotherhood podcast that I conducted. This was back in 2022. Now, Leigh Steinberg is an awesome individual, and I wanted to share this with you guys today on the Gametime Guru podcast because it was an amazing opportunity to talk to a guy who's been in the industry for as long as he has. He's worked with high-profile athletes. Now, some of the stuff you'll hear referenced in here was back from 2022. We'll talk about his Super Bowl party that he puts on. We talk about a couple different things, but we talk about some of the athletes. We talk about Jerry Maguire, which was the movie that was made after Leigh Steinberg. A really cool thing, but some of the stuff that we reference is back from 2022, but I still feel like you guys can learn from this interview. It's really, really cool. So if you hear Nations Best Brotherhood reference, if you hear anything in that sort reference, just know that's why. It's because I'm taking this from the Nations Best Brotherhood podcast. Now, want to remind you guys, if you want to know what Nations Best Football is all about, go back a couple episodes, go find it in the last month's content. You'll see my interview with Bob Smith from Nations Best Football. And my partnership with Bob stems all the way back to 2018-19. And that's why all these opportunities have come about. Now we're partnered. And so a lot of the interviews that I do here are sponsored by Nations Best Football. We have a lot of cool opportunities together. So anywho, wanted to share this with you guys so you guys can go back through the archives and, hear an interview that I did with Leigh Steinberg. So I hope you enjoy this one. This is the Gametime Guru. So
what time is it? Game time.
This is the Gametime Guru podcast, where I interview sports figures from all over the world to help deliver a panoramic view on sports. So whether you're a former athlete, one of the crazies, or simply a casual sports fan, this is the perfect show for you as we peel back the curtains and learn from our guests every single week. I'm your host, Shane Larson, and I'm helping you see sports through a different lens. Today, we are honored to be joined by Leigh Steinberg as we're going to be talking to him about the Super Bowl party that he's got coming up here shortly, as well as some other stuff, and just learning about his experience as an agent. And we're going to be asking him the question that we do on this podcast of what does brotherhood mean to you? So first and foremost, Leigh, thanks for joining us and taking the time out of your busy schedule to allow us to chat with you today.
My pleasure.
And it's awesome. It's awesome speaking to you. It's just, you're a big name figure in this world. And I think it's just amazing that we can learn from somebody like you. I've been following your social media channels for quite some time now. I love, the Wednesday wisdom stuff that you do. You drop a lot of content on there, and I'm always been a fan of yours. So first and foremost, we want to talk about the Super Bowl party that's coming up. That's a big event. So do you mind elaborating a little bit about the Super Bowl party that you got coming up and what it's all about and who's going to be there?
So the Super Bowl, if you will, is like a convention of Americana. Big business, big politics, big sports, big entertainment. And incidentally, there's a football game there somewhere in this next week. And so I wanted to do a party which was the antidote to the noisy, boozy, overcrowded, dark parties. And this is a daytime party with people from all those areas. We raise money for the Lantern Network, which is a mentoring program that helps inner city kids break into business. We do humanitarian awards to an owner, general manager. We have the general manager of both the Chargers and the Rams, Tom Telesco and Les Snead. And we're honoring them for philanthropic things they do off the field to sort of bring the good news that surrounds a sport like football. And then we're exploring the issue of concussion again with my 17th Brain Health Summit. So we've got new protocols like hyperbaric oxygen and light stem and stem cells that we'll be displaying. So it'll be interesting. And the venue is Sony Studios, which is where we filmed a little bit of Jerry Maguire. And so it will be a fundraiser, educational, and also a lot of fun.
That's so cool. Yeah, there's going to be some big names there. And you mentioned Sony Studios where they filmed Jerry Maguire. You know, if people are living under a rock, they might not fully know this yet, but hopefully they do. You know, Jerry Maguire, you have some ties to that movie. You know what I mean? And for those who might not fully understand, what was your role in that movie, I guess, as far as like what part did you take in the filming of that movie?
So Cameron Crowe, the writer-director, had done a film called Fast Times at Ridgemont High that I thought was very funny, and he asked if he could follow me around and be a fly on the wall for a film that would center on a sports agent. So he came to the NFL draft in 1993, where I had the first pick, Drew Bledsoe. He came up with us to the press conference with the Patriots. He came to the league meeting where I was showing off free agent players. He came to pro scouting day at USC. He came to the Super Bowl and spent time in my office. And I told him stories, lots and lots of stories. And he went off and wrote the script. So I was technical advisor. So I had to vet the script to make sure the willing suspension of disbelief that holds you in a motion picture did not get broken. So you knew it was genuine. The dialogue was authentic. And then he assigned me actors like Cuba Gooding Jr., who I took to the Super Bowl in Arizona, and I made him pretend he was my wide receiver client all week. So he hung with Desmond Howard and Amani Toomer. And then I actually had to show the quarterback in the film, played by Jerry O'Connell, how to throw a spiral because he had gone to NYU and they didn't have football there. And so it's a 25-year anniversary, and rarely have I been in an airport or out to dinner where someone didn't run up to the table and ask me to say the 4 words or say them to me that start with "show me the."
Yeah, I love that, man. That's so cool. You mentioned something that's interesting there, Leigh, throwing a spiral and how, you know, you had to teach the guy how to throw a spiral. Another guy who you, in your real life, that you were connected to, which is Steve Young, actually didn't know how to throw a spiral when he first got over to BYU when he was young. I read a whole book on him called My Life Behind the Spiral. And for those who didn't know that, Steve Young literally didn't know how to throw a pass properly because they were running a triple option in high school, which I didn't know that my whole life. Of all the big name guys that you've worked with, you know, Steve, Troy, and then now Patrick Mahomes, these types of figures that you've worked with, do you have any that like stick out to you as far as why they are such outstanding human beings?
Well, Warren Moon was the consummate role model. He played for 22 years. And the quality I looked for was the athlete willing to retrace their roots and be a role model? Were they willing to go back to the high school, set up a scholarship fund or work for a Boys and Girls Club or be part of some community outreach? Would they do it at their college? Could we put together a charitable board that would have the leading figures in politics and business and community leaders to do a program like Warwick Dunn giving the 175th single mother and her family the first home they'll ever own by making a down payment and moving them into the home. So it's athletes changing lives. So Patrick Mahomes is an extraordinary person. If you like him on the field, you'll love his 15 and the Mahomies that aids all sorts of children's charities in Kansas City. Obviously, Steve Young went to the Super Bowl. Troy Aikman went to the Super Bowl. Ben Roethlisberger went to the Super Bowl. Patrick's been to the Super Bowl. So, but you're looking for that special quality of caring. And also, what does the player do in adversity? When the quarterback's thrown a couple interceptions, the crowd's booing, and the game's getting out of hand, do they have the ability to compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, and elevate their level of play in critical situations. That's the magic that separates great players from average ones.
You know, it's interesting that you just said that too. I'll dissect that for a second. Russell Wilson, another quarterback in the NFL right now. His mental consultant, his name was Trevor Moawad. Rest in peace. Trevor just passed away a couple months ago. But I read a book of Trevor's called "It Takes What It Takes," and it's about thinking neutrally. Anyway, the whole concept is specifically geared towards athletes, and it's exactly what you're talking about when they face adversity, especially quarterbacks at a high level like the National Football League. You know, how do you when it's all great when things are dandy, but when the adversity hits, how do you respond to that and be able to continue to execute at a high level without having to deal, do too much with the outside noise? And so it's interesting because all those men you just mentioned right there, there's a common denominator there. One, they're great human beings, but two, they actually understand how to face adversity and perform under pressure. Leigh, go ahead.
We all do.
Yeah.
And because life will push you back and you won't achieve or accomplish everything you want, and some situation out of your control will frustrate you. Can you be resilient? Can you get pushed back but rise again to continue to endeavor?
I love that. You know, Leigh, one thing that I remember you saying a while back was with these guys that you were talking about, the Warren Moons, the Steve Youngs, the Troy Aikmans, the work done. You talk about all these guys. You once said that for these guys, one of the things that you do to try to keep them out of trouble is to not. You talked about it once about how they stay out of trouble and the distractions and everything that happen as a professional athlete. And I would love if you could elaborate a little bit about that and what you try to with your clients that you take on. What's one of your biggest ways that you can actually help them stay out of trouble? Because when you get into the limelight, you have the money, you have the bling, you have all the accolades, but then there comes some problems. They always say more money, more problems. How do you make it so that your athletes that you have, your clients, don't necessarily run into that trap, I guess?
So the best cure is prevention. And it's having a discussion with an athlete where they understand that they're going to be handsomely compensated for being in a pro sport, but the trade-off is their behavior has to be beyond reproach. And every time they leave their house, they're under a microscope. So it's understanding that not to get into a car with alcohol in your system. It's understanding not to go to a place where alcohol is served where people get into fights. It's understanding not to put your hands on any other person in anger, especially not women, and be careful in your relationships. And that if you don't want to live up to those standards, you can go play on a sandlot. But if you want to be part of professional sports, this is the critical key. And you have to make your mind up while you're going into the sport that you're going to be circumspect in those public behaviors. And if you don't want to be judged, just stay home.
I like that a lot. I hope everyone listening right now is taking some notes, whether it's on your phone or you're taking actual physical notes. Rewind that and listen to Leigh for the last 60 seconds and take notes on that piece. You know, Leigh, the presenting sponsor of our podcast is Trophy Case. It's digital trading cards. And I wanted to, I know you've been, I guess, someone like Bob from Nations Best has made you familiar with what Trophy Case digital trading cards are. And I'm just curious, with the digital trading card market, with Trophy Case, if you have any thoughts on that particular business model, and if so, what are those thoughts on Trophy Case?
Well, the first key is understanding that for many people, their information source and frame of reference is the computer screen, the cell phone. And so this new reality means that the ability to get an iconic painting or an iconic photograph, a critical moment, a nice piece design, and to be able to have ownership of that and access to that is a huge premium. And for hardcore sports fans, that magic moment, that iconic situation, to be able to recapture that is lots of fun. And so this is the world today. And it's an adjustment to people who are used to use trading cards in their bicycle spokes to make noise. But that we're living in a cloud world, in a virtual world, where what used to be virtual is now reality.
I love everything that you're saying. It's like perfect. I mean, we are going to the digital world. I just think it's interesting to see the evolution of that. I love that right there. 2 questions left for you, Leigh, to respect your time today. The first one being name, image, and likeness. That's a new thing that's been rolled out for collegiate athletes as of the last 12 to 16 months. It's a new thing. Do you see in your professional experience that you've had? I mean, you're dealing with these athletes that are at the professional level, but they're obviously coming out of college, so you know who these people are. Do you think that the name, image, and likeness, I guess, legalization across and regulation across the country is a good thing for athletes? Or what are your thoughts on the NIL going around in collegiate sports at this moment?
I do think it's a good thing, and it's here to stay. And it hadn't even been 14 months. It's just been July 1st. There have always been athletes who are on a college campus who come from tough circumstances, and they would send a scholarship, part of it, home to their family, and they would live at a lower standard of living than their non-athletic peers. So that because if you're not an athlete, you can work during the school year, or you get an allowance for your parents, but athletes can't do that. So this has always been a problem, and the NCAA could have fixed it much easier by granting players with needs stipends where they got a little more money and the rest of it. They didn't, so California passed SB 206 a couple of years ago, and people at colleges across the country feared that California athletes would get ahead because they'd be able to hire a marketing agent and do endorsements at a very early age. So this starts as early as high school. And what we've seen is that it's not just a couple star quarterbacks. It's every athlete at Oregon from Phil Knight. It's female athletes. It's Olympians. It's and many of those colleges have affinity groups that really are excited about the college, and so these alums own businesses, and they will help. And it's 15 guys named Sam given stipends from Sam's Club, it's 15 guys named Jack from Jack in the Box. So it's been a veritable explosion. It changes the agency business because it forces a conversation with much younger people than normally we'd be talking to. And, the danger is that you could take a young athlete and put his profile so high when his accomplishments on the field are not there yet that it could make him look presumptuous and be premature. But its time has come, and it's just going to continue to expand and get more elaborate. And that cow has left the barn.
I love it, man. I love it. So, Leigh, last question for you. This is the whole premise of this podcast and this branding around it for Nations Best is brotherhood. And so the question we ask our guests on this show is, what does brotherhood mean to you? So I will ask you, Leigh, through all your experience, whether it be through competing or whether it be through, being an agent for those athletes and being around the game, what does brotherhood mean to you?
It means that my dad used to say to me, when you're looking for they or them to solve a problem, the amorphous they, older figure, political figures, he'd say, you could wait forever. The they is you, son. And he emphasized 2 core values. One was treasure relationships, especially family. So at the end of the day, what are you left with? You're left with, did you try to make a difference in the world, and what are the quality of your relationships? Were you a good friend? Were you there for people in times of crisis? Were you a good father, a good son? So brotherhood, the sense of camaraderie, 2 people with shared values, caring for each other, and experiencing life together is in many ways, besides spiritual values, the meaning of life.
I absolutely love it. Again, a golden nugget from Leigh Steinberg that you guys can just go ahead and take notes for. Thank you, Leigh. I appreciate your time, sir, and sharing your information with us. And good luck with the Super Bowl party and all the endeavors moving forward, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks. Take care now. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview. I hope you enjoyed going back and hearing what Leigh had to say. I always enjoy going back through some of the interviews that I've done and reminding myself of the things that I've learned about that person. And I was doing that today or this week, I should say. And that's why I decided to put this out there today, because I was like, man, there are a lot of people who are listening to my podcast now that might not have been listening to my podcast or following me back in those times. And they may not have even known that I was doing this other podcast at the time. So I really hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope you learned from it. So make sure to subscribe to my podcast, because we'll be coming to you next week with another one. So take care. Guys, thanks so much for listening to another episode of my show. Now, if you could go and do me a favor, head over to iTunes, give me 5 stars, and leave me a review, it would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your support.